What I want to discuss now is how to build a bug, how to put their bodies together, and how understanding this will help to remove some of the mystery that surrounds insects. If you understand this anatomy, you will understand identification a little bit better, and you'll also be able to formulate better pest management strategies. One, because you'll know what you're dealing with, and two, because you'll be able to understand how they create the damage that they create. So it's just a way of knowing your enemy if it's a pest, or knowing your friend if it's a beneficial organism. So we'll start by talking about these three distinct body sections: the head, thorax, and abdomen of an insect. Each of these plays a really important role in how the insect is going to succeed. Each piece of the body has a different job, and they have different organs attached to them that help them to succeed at these jobs. If we start at the front of the body with the head, we're talking about the center for sensory information. It's where a lot of the sense organs are. When you look at your head, you have your eyes, you have your nose, your mouth, your ears. Insects have their eyes, their antenna, their mouth parts all on their head. And because all of these sensory organs are there, they also have their largest ganglion in their head. It's the brain. And this is the first of about 6 to 7 brains that's going to be in the insect's body. But it's big because it has to process what the insect sees and what it touches with its different organs. So when you look at the outside of the head, you're going to see a few different things that they use to be successful. The first might be some of the eyes. So they have 2 kinds of eyes on their body. The simple ones are called ocelli, or simple eyes. These are tiny dots that usually are on the very top of the head, and they usually form a triangle shape like you see in this scanning electron microscope image. They're called simple eyes because they don't do very much. They're not very complex. They only perceive light and dark. So for this bee that you see in this image, she may poke her head out of the hole in the ground that she lives in, and if it's dark outside, she'll say, "Dark, go back to sleep." Or if it's light outside, she may say, "Light time, let's go find food." It's all it's there for. It's a very simple structure. The other eyes that you'll see on their head are the complex ones, and we call these the compound eyes. There's a pair of compound eyes on the head, but when you look at them, each compound eye is made up of hundreds or maybe even thousands of lenses. The way that I think about this is to think about if you have a phone that has a camera on it, on the back of your phone, imagine instead of the one lens to take a picture, there was 1,000 lenses. And every time you hit the button, your phone took 1,000 distinct pictures that were looking at slightly different spots that you had pointed the camera at. That's how an insect eye works. So it creates a composite image. When people think of this vision that insects have, they often reference a kaleidoscope. They think that it has to be all the same image multiple times in the insect's eyes. If you ever watch The Fly from back in the 50s, when the fly flies around, it sees 100 of the same thing over and over again. The real way that they see is more like this middle circle in the slide that you see on the screen. It's 100 individual pictures that they stitch together into a composite image. It's very blurry. It doesn't have a lot of depth perception. They would be nearsighted like I am. If they were our size, they would need big glasses. And it's very different from our vision. It's not very crisp. There's no field of depth to it per se. They do get some cool vision attributes though. If we look at their spectrum of vision, they actually get to see different colors than we do. So humans, we see Roy, G, Viv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And we have red here at Nebraska, go big red, right? Insects, they don't get to see red. They wouldn't be Nebraska fans because they can't see the color red. They are gifted with the ability, though, to see UV light instead. So their world looks quite a bit different than ours. If we look at these flowers in this next slide, you see how we see the world on the left and how an insect sees the same image on the right. So our flower is beautiful and yellow, right, Natalia? What kind of flower is this? A rudbeckia. If it doesn't have 6 legs, I don't really understand it very well. So I have to have horticulturalists tell me what kind of flower it is. But if that's how it looks to us, this on the right is how the insect sees it. The UV light helps them to see black spots, sort of black-purple spots on the flower that we call nectar guides that tell the bees that want to visit this flower, the food is here in the center. Please fly towards here. So their vision is different, but it's not worse than ours. It's just a different way of seeing the world. Because they're kind of nearsighted, they do need something to help them sense around them. And what has helped them for a long time are their antennae. Insects all come with a pair of antennae that are located on their head. So these antennae are there for smelling, they're for touching, sometimes they're even used for hearing. They can detect vibrations, like our eardrum detects vibrations, but they usually project off the side of the head so that the insect can probe around with them and feel their surroundings. They may tell the insect that they're touching something delicious to eat. In the left here, we have some ants that have found a Pringles chip that they're going to chow down on and take back to the nest. So when they touch this Pringles chip, they can detect fats and oils and carbohydrates and things that they want to eat. They can also use the antenna to help orient them towards a food source. So mosquitoes, if I were with you, I'd say, how many of you like mosquitoes? And none of you would raise your hands, and we would all have a good laugh about everybody hates mosquitoes. But when they are looking for you, they use their antenna, the female mosquito does, to smell for you. So if they're downwind of you and you're breathing as you run and take a hike up a mountain, your breath is trailing behind you, and they can detect that CO2, and they know that some large breathing, warm-blooded mammal is in front of them. So they'll orient towards you using those antennae. The antennae also help them to detect pheromones, which are hormones that affect fellow individuals of your same species usually. There's a lot of different kinds of insect pheromones out there. One of the main ones that we hear about are aggregation pheromones. These are the smells that they detect with their antenna that tell an individual insect, hey, a party's happening over here, we're all hanging out on this brush, or we're all hanging out in this house, and we're gonna go to sleep here for the winter. If you've ever dealt with multicolored Asian lady beetles in the home, they produce an aggregation pheromone that tells other individuals to come to your house and spend the winter with them. We have alarm pheromones. Aphids are an exhibit of this. They are, when they're disturbed, they'll produce this smell that makes all the other aphids let go of the plant and fall down to the ground. So it's a way of warning each other about danger. Another famous example of this could be honeybees, which produce a pheromone to say the colony is under attack and we all need to fly out and sting the bear or the beekeeper because they're bothering us. We've also got epidietic pheromones, which tell individual females not to lay their eggs in certain areas. In this case, in the image here, we have a wasp that she's looking to lay her eggs in this blueberry. If another wasp has come along and already laid her eggs there, she leaves behind a smell that tells other females not to bother with that blueberry so that they don't all waste their egg clutches on the same berry. We've also got trail pheromones. Ants and termites use these to detect where others have been. Ants can smell this trail pheromone. That's why you often see them in a line coming into your home under the windowsill, because they're following the smell that the first ant laid down. And then, of course, sexual pheromones that say, I'm a lady, you're a fella, maybe we could put on some Marvin Gaye and go back and make baby cockroaches or what have you. So these pheromones are effective because they travel slowly, they don't fade away very quickly, and they're effective over a long range thanks to the antenna on an insect's head. Each antenna can be divided into 3 parts. You're going to hear the number 3 a lot when we talk about insects. It's kind of their magic number. So there's 3 body segments, there's 3 pieces to each antenna, 3 to lots of things. So the pieces of the antenna that you need to remember for identification purposes are the scape, the pedicel, and the flagellum. The scape is the piece that's closest to the insect's head. The pedicel is the second piece, and then we have the flagellum. The way I remember it is the scape escapes from the head, and then the pedestal is the pedestal that the flagellum sits on. It's a way of helping with identification. When you read certain ID guides, they're going to talk about the length of these different pieces, or how many hairs are attached to them, or what color they are. So knowing which piece is which will be helpful in the future. There are many different kinds of insect antenna. The simplest kind is called filiform. These are antennae in which the segments are all basically the same. It creates a thread-like appearance to the antenna. And they're the most common type. You see it on this ground beetle here in the right image. They're just very simple, normal-looking antenna. Nothing too special to write home about. Other antennae can be quite spectacular and interesting to look at. And two representatives of that are the pectinate and the plumose antenna. Pectinate antennae are sort of suggestive of a comb. They're flat on one side and then have these long fingers on the other side. And if you saw this beetle, you could snap off one of his antennae and you could use it to comb your eyebrow or your mustache because of that comb-like structure. Then on the other end of this spectrum, we have the plumose antennae, which are feather-like. They have fingers on each side that create this sort of long peacock feather look. And these are important for insects that need to pick up lots of information from their environment. We see these on males very often, and we see these on insects that can fly really well because they use these antennae to smell for females that may be far away. So for this beetle, he's emerged from one tree, and his potential mate could be in a tree that's a half an acre or more away. And he needs to be able to detect her with these big antennae. Same for the Luna moth on the right. So lots of surface area for them to pick up more chemical information. There's also serrate and lamellate. Serrate antennae are common on beetles for the most part, and this is a saw-like antenna. So instead of looking like a comb, it looks like the teeth of a saw blade on those projections on one side. And then also in beetles, we have what we call lamellate antennae, which are sort of filiform at first, and then at the tip, they have this fan-like or book-like structure, these fingers that can open and close and help them to detect lots of chemical information again. We see these quite often on scarab beetles, for example. Some scarab beetles like chafers or Japanese beetles, which I'm sure is a popular insect to many of you. This is another way of them detecting each other in a greater area. So it's sort of like pectinate and plumose, but they're just structured a little bit differently. So serrate and lamellate, that leads us into some of the smaller antennae, which are aerostate and cetaceous. Aerostate antennae only exist, as far as we know, on flies. And on flies, what we see is this big balloon-like structure that you see coming off the front of her face. And then on top of it is the flagellum. And it looks like a plumose antenna that's been glued to this sort of yellowy-orange balloon. So if you see this kind of antenna on a creature, it's a fly. And that's helpful for identification's sake. On fast-flying insects, you may see a cetaceous antenna. This is just a scape, a pedestal, and then one hair that comes off of the tip there. And these are on fast-flying insects. So cicadas, giant water bugs, dragonflies. It looks sort of like a pencil mustache, like Walt Disney used to have. And this is helpful in lessening drag. If you want to be a fast-flying insect and get around the world quick, you can't have big, long antennae that are going to slow you down. So you have these tiny ones instead. They're just very, very simple in terms of how they work. And then we have geniculate antenna, also known as elbowed antenna. I call them the field goal antenna. They look like they're saying the field goal is good for the Huskers, and we see these on ants. This is only found really in that group. The final kind that I want to mention are called the capitate and the clavate antenna. Capitate and clavate antenna are found mostly on beetles, moths, and butterflies. With capitate, what we see is a long, thin area that at the top sort of explodes into this large bulb. It looks kind of like a light bulb. It's thin and stem-like on the bottom, but then rounded and globular on the top. With clave antenna, it looks more like an earthworm. It's thin and it gradually gets fatter towards the tip of it. And these antennae, again, are found mostly on moths and butterflies and sometimes on beetles. With that, I want to tell you a little bit about some of the mouth parts that you can see on insects. They come in lots of shapes and sizes, and they perform different roles for the insects. So we're going to go through A, B, C, D, and E here this evening. A is called a chewing mouth part. It's the most common on the insects. It appears in herbivores and in predators, and it's just two simple mashing teeth called mandibles that crunch food up, and then other parts of the mouth help to shove that food into their mouth with the palps and all these other things that you see as part of the mouth. These can create symptomatic types of damage. Chewing mouth parts can be used to create skeletonization. It can be used to create total defoliation, like you see in the upper right-hand corner. Sometimes they make shot hole damage, like you see in the lower left-hand corner. And their feeding can create bronzing for evergreen plants, like you see in the lower right. So these mouth parts, when they feed on a plant, they're chewing off different portions of it, and it leads behind these different kinds of symptoms. And if you know that they're chewing mouth parts, you know that you're looking at an insect that creates this kind of damage and has those mouth parts. So it's going to help you with identification in the future. There's also piercing sucking mouth parts or needle-like mouth parts. These are the second most common, and they can be used on plants like an aphid or a cicada, or on animals like on the bed bug that you see on the right there. These are used to poke into an object and then to siphon out fluids for food, just like a needle that you would use at a doctor's office. These create distinctive damage as well. On a plant, they create wilting and leaf curling. So if you see leaves that are slowly curling over and there's no herbicides that have been used, the plant is properly watered, this might be an indicator that aphids or whiteflies or scale insects are feeding on that plant. And as they do that, they draw the sap out and the leaves curl up, and it gives them a place to hide. On our skin, when an insect has a piercing sucking mouth part, it usually creates a characteristic red welt on our skin. So mosquitoes and bed bugs, this is what you're going to see on your arm. Then we have sponging mouth parts. Sponges are used to clean up liquids typically in the human world. In the insect world, flies have sponge mouth parts that help them to suck up liquids that they eat. And so when they land on our food, what they have to do, if it's a piece of bread, they may regurgitate some acid that dissolves part of the bread, and then they lap it up with that sponging mouth part. So that's why we don't like flies to land on our food, because when they do, they immediately vomit on it so that they can eat some of it. It's not very polite of them, I don't think. Then we have siphoning mouth parts. This is a long straw-like proboscis that sucks up liquid. It's kind of like a crazy straw that you could put in some milk if you were a kid. Chewing, lapping mouth parts. These are found mostly with the wasps and the bees. They're used to eat solids and liquids, so pollen and nectar for these pollinating insects. And they have chewing mandibles, but then they have a long tongue that comes out to suck up liquids with. And those are the mouths, and that's the head. It's got a lot of things it has to do. It's why it's got that big brain in it that we mentioned before.